Have you ever noticed how every generation seems to have a story attached to it? Boomers are blamed for everything. Millennials are analyzed to death. Gen Z is constantly under a microscope. And then there's Gen X, right in the middle. Quiet, overlooked, rarely discussed. Not because they don't matter, but because they never learned to need the attention in the first place. To understand Gen X, you have to go back to something most people don't think twice about. Childhood. Not the nostalgic version, but the real one. It's the late 1970s. You're 8 years old. The school bus drops you off and drives away. You walk up to your house, pull a key off a string around your neck, and let yourself in. The door closes behind you, and the house is silent. No parents, no supervision, no one asking how your day was. So you figure it out. You pour yourself a bowl of cereal. You turn on the TV. You sit there and wait. But after a while, something shifts. You stop waiting because you realize something most kids aren't supposed to realize that early in life. Nobody is coming. And that realization doesn't just change your afternoon. It changes how your brain works. There's no one to ask what to do, no one to double check your decisions. So every choice you make carries weight. You do something, and then you deal with whatever happens next. Immediately. No pause, no buffer, no second chances. Over time, your brain adapts to that environment. It starts thinking ahead, running scenarios, predicting consequences before they happen. Not because you're naturally anxious, but because you were trained to think that way. You learn to rely on yourself, not because it's empowering, but because it's necessary. But independence wasn't the only lesson. Gen X also grew up watching the world around them crack. They saw marriages fall apart. They saw people dedicate decades to a company only to be laid off without warning. They were told that if you worked hard and followed the rules, everything would work out. And then they watched that promise collapse. So they adjusted, quietly. They stopped expecting stability. They stopped trusting systems blindly. They stopped believing that anything was guaranteed. Not because they were negative, but because they were paying attention. What looks like pessimism from the outside is often just pattern recognition. They've seen enough to know how things can end. That same awareness shaped how they relate to the modern world. Today, everything is visible. People share their lives constantly. Thoughts, opinions, mistakes, all broadcast in real time. But Gen X moves differently. They grew up in a world where mistakes faded, where embarrassing moments didn't follow you forever, where your life wasn't permanently documented. And that taught them something simple but powerful. The less people know about you, the safer you are. So they watch, they observe, they understand the system. But they don't feel the need to fully participate in it. Not because they don't understand it, but because they understand it too well. Even their sense of humor reflects this mindset. The sarcasm, the irony, the detached tone people often associate with Gen X isn't random. It's a response to growing up in a world full of contradictions. They were raised during a time when they were told everything was fine, while constantly being reminded that things could fall apart at any moment. When you grow up inside that kind of tension, you learn to keep a certain distance from everything. You learn not to take things at face value. You learn to laugh at things that might otherwise overwhelm you. You learn to care, but not too visibly, because being too invested feels risky. That same quiet realism shows up in how they work. Gen X doesn't talk much about work ethic. They don't build an identity around being busy or productive. They just show up and do what needs to be done. Their first jobs weren't curated experiences. They were real responsibilities. Delivering newspapers before sunrise, working registers that didn't always function properly, handling problems in real time without guidance. There was no applause, no recognition, no one telling them they were doing a great job. So they learned something early. Work isn't about validation. It's about function. They don't chase attention, they chase competence. Because competence is something no one can take away from you. They watched too many systems fail to trust stability, so they focused on becoming adaptable, useful, reliable, the kind of person who can handle things when they break. And yet, there's a paradox at the center of all this. Gen X rarely asks for help, but they give it, consistently, quietly, without needing to be seen for it. They won't announce their support, they won't perform it publicly, but when it matters, they're there, because they understand what it feels like to not have that. Their loyalty isn't loud, it's operational. But that kind of self-reliance comes with a cost. When you've spent your life handling everything on your own, it becomes difficult to do anything differently. Asking for help feels unnatural. Depending on others feels uncertain. Opening up feels unnecessary. So even when things get heavy, the instinct is the same. Handle it, move on, don't make it a problem for anyone else. From the outside, it looks like strength, and it is. But it can also become isolation. Gen X sits in a unique position in history. They grew up in an analog world, then adapted to a digital one. They understand both. They can navigate systems that older generations struggle with, while still remembering how to function without them. They connect two completely different ways of living. But being the bridge comes with its own reality. Bridges don't get recognized. People use them every day without thinking about what's holding everything together. And that might be the most defining thing about Gen X. They were never raised with applause, so they never learned to depend on it. They don't need to be seen to know what they're capable of. They don't need constant validation to keep going. They don't need recognition to feel real. They just do what needs to be done and move forward. If any part of this felt familiar, if you saw yourself in it, or maybe understood someone in your life a little more clearly, consider subscribing. There's a lot more beneath the surface of how people think, and this is only the beginning.